Hi, welcome to Athletics and Recreation Safety Training. Today you're here to learn about bloodborne pathogens and hazard communication. The Occupational Health and Safety Administration, otherwise known as OSHA, creates standards to protect workers and ensure safe working conditions. The OSHA bloodborne pathogen standards covers employers at risk for coming in contact with blood and other potential infectious materials. You are here because your supervisor has determined that your job duties may expose you to blood or other potential infectious materials. The bloodborne pathogen standards requires employers to provide training about bloodborne pathogen diseases and what workers can do to protect themselves. OSHA requires this training to be done annually. Because you are working in an area that stores chemicals, the OSHA Hazard Communication Standards requires employers to educate you on hazards posed by their presence. This training is required when you first start working in an area and again if a new hazard is introduced. OSHA regulations require employers to establish and expose control plans and a hazard communication plan that clearly details Mason's process for dealing with bloodborne pathogens and chemical exposures so that employees know how to deal with these hazards. Mason's plans are available on the Environmental and Health and Safety Office website, which is ehs.gmu.edu, if you'd like to review them. What are bloodborne pathogens? A bloodborne pathogen is any infectious microorganism that can cause disease if it gets into your bloodstream. Most bloodborne pathogens are either bacteria or viruses. Bacteria are single-celled microorganisms that are everywhere, in the air, soil, and water, on plants, and in animals. Most bacteria are harmless or even helpful. The bacteria in our intestines, for example, are forms of helpful bacteria. Some bacteria, like strep, tuberculosis, can cause infection. Most bacterial infections are easily treated with antibiotics like penicillin. Viruses are smaller than bacteria and can't survive without a living host. A virus attaches itself to blood cells and replicates. Unlike bacteria, most viruses do cause disease. Usually a vaccine is needed to prevent a viral infection. What body fluids contain bloodborne pathogens? Bloodborne pathogens can be found in an infected person's blood, but they are also in other bodily fluids such as semen, vaginal secretions, and cerebral fluid, which are referred to as other potential infectious material. Even if blood has dried, it can still be infectious. Body fluids like tears, sweat, saliva, urine, vomit, and feces are only considered infectious if blood is visible. Since it's not always easy to distinguish whether or not blood is visible in these body fluids, it is important to minimize exposure to these fluids and use caution when working in areas around these materials. How can bloodborne pathogens get into your body? Bloodborne pathogens are spread when blood or bodily fluids from an infected person get into the bloodstream of another person. Blood or other potential infectious material can enter your body in several ways, most commonly through breaks in your skin like cuts or scrapes, but also is splashed in your eyes, nose, and mouth. It can enter your body through an inadvertent needle stick, or if someone who has an infection bites you. Diseases like Lyme, malaria, or West Nile are not considered bloodborne pathogens since they are not transmitted through direct blood-to-blood contact. These diseases are passed through the saliva of an insect, like mosquitoes or ticks, who bite an infected person, then transmit the disease to someone else when they land on and then bite them. So even though the causative agent can be found in the blood, These are classified as vector-borne diseases. Most common blood-borne pathogens. The OSHA standard requires Mason to educate workers on common types of blood-borne diseases, specifically HIV, hepatitis B, and hepatitis C, which are the three most common blood-borne diseases worldwide. Roughly 5% of the population of the world is infected with one of these three pathogens. Human immunodeficiency virus, also known as HIV, first appeared in 1959. Scientists believe it was first passed to a hunter in West Africa from the blood of an infected chimpanzee. With limited health care in many areas, Africa remains the area of the world with the highest number of HIV infections. HIV is a virus that attacks the white blood cells in your body. Your white blood cells protect you against disease and illness. Many people with HIV live for years without any outward signs, but over time, the HIV virus overwhelms their white blood cells and the disease develops into acquired immunodeficiency syndrome, or AIDS. A person is considered to have AIDS when their white blood cell count falls below 200. A normal white blood cell count is anywhere between 500 and 1500. With a significantly low white blood cell count, a person's immune system is severely weakened and unable to fight off infections, so getting the flu could be fatal to those people. HIV is most often transmitted through sexual contact or shared needles. While it can be transmitted by contact with a bloody cut or open sore, non-sexual transmission is rare. There is no vaccine to prevent HIV infection, and there is no cure for HIV or AIDS, but medications are available that can slow the progression and greatly reduce the ability to pass the virus to others. Hepatitis comes from the Greek word heper, which means liver. Hepatitis is inflammation of the liver. There are 5 types of hepatitis viruses: A, B, C, D, and E. The most common forms of hepatitis are A, B, and C. Hepatitis D is uncommon and only occurs in people that have hepatitis B. Hepatitis A and E are spread through contaminated food and water and in areas of poor sanitation and inadequate waste disposal, or less common in the U.S. This map shows the prevalence of Hep C worldwide. Those in the U.S. are at low to moderate risk for hepatitis C. Hepatitis B and C are most common in Africa and Asia, primarily due to inadequate salinization and reuse of medical equipment and blood transfusion of unscreened blood. This map shows the prevalence of Hep B worldwide. Those in the U.S. are at a low to moderate risk for hepatitis B. The risk for chronic infection from hepatitis B varies according to age, but children and infants are more at risk. 95% of adults recover completely from hepatitis B infections, but is still considered a serious health risk as it can destroy the liver tissue and increase the chance of liver cancer. Intravenous drug use is the most common way to get hepatitis B and C. Hepatitis B is sometimes referred to as the silent epidemic. This is because most people are infected don't have any symptoms. Those that do have symptoms may experience fever, fatigue, loss of appetite, abdominal pain, or jaundice, or yellowing of the skin. If symptoms develop, they usually appear 1 to 4 months after exposure. There is a vaccine for hepatitis B. There is no vaccine for hepatitis C, but there is a treatment and a cure. Hepatitis B used to be quite prevalent, but cases began significantly declining in 1976 with the development of a vaccine. OSHA's bloodborne pathogen standard requires employers to offer the Hepatitis B vaccination series free of charge to any employee who is likely to have exposure to blood or other potential infectious materials. If you are a Mason employee, you must complete the Hepatitis B vaccination form, either accepting or declining the vaccine. If you have had the series complete the form declining the vaccine. Mason does not cover the cost for students, but if you want the vaccine, you can get it at the Student Health Services. Anyone, and that meaning employees, students, visitors, or guests, can also get the vaccine through their personal physician or local pharmacy. The Affordable Care Act requires insurances to cover the cost of the series. The series is a one-time vaccine. Once you've had the series, you don't need it again. 95% of those vaccinated are protected. Even so, a titer is recommended to confirm immunity. A titer is a blood test that looks for antibodies in your blood. Titers should be done 1 to 2 months after completing the series. Titers done years later may not accurately reflect immunity. After receiving the vaccine, your body develops antibodies. Over time, these antibody levels start to decline. Even though they are present, they may not register on a titer. Given that, Mason follows CDC guidance, which does not recommend titers to be done to confirm immunity. Revaccination is not recommended in persons with intact immune systems, but it is safe to receive the series again. Hepatitis B vaccination series was added to the United States Childhood Vaccination Schedule in 1991. Choosing to vaccinate is a personal choice, but if your family chose to vaccinate and you were born in or after 1991, you have likely had the hepatitis B vaccine. Also, the state of Virginia requires university students to show proof of Hep B vaccinations. If you were not vaccinated, you have to sign a declaration form stating you chose not to be vaccinated. HIPAA privacy regulations prevent Student Health Services from sharing medical information with EHS. So students need to check with Student Health Services to see if you have been vaccinated. Most common ways Mason Recreation personnel will be exposed to bloodborne pathogens is when administering first aid, cleaning up a blood spill, disinfecting equipment that might have been inadvertently contaminated, or from an accidental needle stick. So how do you protect yourself from bloodborne pathogens? The first way, using universal precautions. Regardless of what you think you know, protect yourself by treating any blood or other potential infectious material you come in contact with as if they were infectious. Another way to protect yourself is wearing personal protective equipment, or PPE. You may not expect to come into contact with bloodborne pathogens, but you never know what may happen. Follow your department's clothing requirements, but in general, wearing closed-toe shoes and long pants, covering open cuts with a Band-Aid, and wearing gloves and safety glasses when giving first aid or cleaning up a spill will provide a barrier that helps keep bloodborne pathogens from entering your body. Gloves and protective glasses can be found in most first aid kits or spill response kits. Most gloves in the first aid kits are nitrile. These are good all-purpose chemical-resistant gloves for use in general first aid. If you have large rings or other jewelry on your body, remove them before putting on your gloves to help prevent tears or rips in the gloves. Another way to protect yourself and others is dispose of things properly. Trash has significant amounts of blood, bodily fluids, or other potential infectious materials, has the potential to infect others, like housekeepers or trash handlers, who come in contact with it. It is considered regulated medical waste. It must be put in a red biohazard bag. The biohazard symbol identifies materials that are potentially infectious. Regulated medical waste has to be incinerated to destroy any potential bloodborne pathogens. It is much more expensive to dispose of regulated medical waste than regular trash. A small amount of blood does not put workers at risk. Like you do at home, things with small amount of bloods, like a Band-Aid, can be thrown in regular trash. Only trash that is saturated with blood or other potential infectious materials to the point that you can wring it out, or if dried, flakes off, is considered regulated medical waste. Sharps are things like needles used in research labs or EpiPens or insulin pens. Because they propose a risk to housekeepers and trash keepers and waste workers, don't throw sharps in the regular trash. OSHA requires that they be disposed of in hard red sharps container. Don't fill the sharps container above the fill line. Call EHS to pick up full biohazard bags or sharps containers. Before something happens, make sure you know where to find everything. Check to see that there are gloves that fit you. If gloves are too big, you may not notice or feel a needle stick. Departments provide PPEs, not EHS, so talk to your supervisor about PPEs. Do you have a latex allergy? Most departments at Mason no longer stock latex gloves, but there still may be some around. If you have an allergy, make sure you confirm that the gloves used by your department are latex-free. Where is the first aid kit in the AED? Look for the first aid kits in your work area. AED locations are cited on the escape route maps displayed in the building, typically near stairwells or elevators. If the AED is on another floor, though, that map won't show it. A complete list is available on our website, which is ehs.gmu.edu. Where are the cleaning supplies? So make sure you ask where your disinfectants, paper towels, biohazard bags, sharp containers, and anything else you may need to dispose of bloodborne pathogens and materials are located. How to properly remove gloves. After dealing with a blood exposure, it is important to remove your gloves carefully to ensure you don't expose yourself to the blood on the gloves. This video will show the proper way to remove soiled gloves.
Hey everyone, it's Sarah with RegisteredNurseRN.com, and in this video I want to show you how to properly remove soiled gloves. So our goal is to remove our gloves without getting the stuff that's on our gloves on our skin or on our scrubs. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our thumb and our index finger and we're going to pinch the cuff of one of the gloves. Then we're going to take the glove and peel it off. And we're going to grasp the glove completely in our hand and close our hand tight. Prevent it from hanging down because we don't want to touch it. Then we're going to take our index finger of our ungloved hand and we're going to slide it underneath the cuff of the glove. And we're just going to peel it off. And it puts it in a nice little bunch. And then we're going to throw it away and wash our hands. Thank you so much.
So make sure to throw the gloves away immediately after the incident. Virus droplets can remain infectious for several hours outside the body, and bacteria can survive for weeks on surfaces. Touching things with soiled gloves puts everyone at risk. Why wash your hands? I protected myself from bloodborne pathogens by wearing gloves. Why do I need to wash my hands? Even though you removed your gloves in the proper way, it's difficult to do without some contamination. In a study, over half of medical professionals, 53%, contaminated their skin or clothing removing their gloves. These are people that don on and off gloves regularly. Contamination for those of us who don't remove gloves regularly will be even higher. Since you may inadvertently contaminate yourself removing the gloves, it is important you wash your hands afterwards. The CDC recommends you wash your hands for 20 seconds. 20 seconds is a long time. It's about the time it takes you to sing happy birthday twice. So if you can see on the picture, this is a study of people who wash their hands under ultraviolet light. So as you can see in number 1, before washing your hands are very contaminated. And then just rinse and shake, and then so on. As you can see, 30 seconds, which is picture 6, there's less contaminants on the person's hands after washing. Blood spills must be cleaned up. Large blood spills are cleaned by housekeeping. If a large spill occurs, make sure to restrict access to the area to prevent people from walking through and contaminating surrounding areas, and then call housekeeping. You may be asked to clean up a smaller blood spill. If necessary, cordon off the area to protect people from walking through and contaminating other areas. Then find the first aid kit and put on the gloves and safety glasses. Mason follows CDC guidelines when cleaning a spill. First, lay absorbent materials like a towel or paper towels over the spill. Saturate the area with a 10% bleach solution, that's 1 part bleach, 9 parts water, for 10 to 15 minutes. Chlorine bleach kills both bacteria and virus, including HIV and hepatitis B and C. But it takes time. It takes 10 minutes to kill hepatitis B. Many other cleaning products can kill bacteria, but not all are effective against viruses. The GMU disinfectant used by Mason Rec is both bacterial and viral, is acceptable to use to disinfect blood spills. Wipe up the contents of the spill starting from the outside and working in. If saturated with blood, put materials and gloves in an RMA bag, otherwise trash. Like an indoor spill, saturate an outdoor area with a 10% bleach solution for 10 to 15 minutes. Dispose of disinfectant spill area with 5-gallon, disperse disinfected area with 5-gallon bucket of water or a spray hose. The final steps. Remove any clothing that was contaminated. Remove your gloves and then wash your hands with soap and water. Even though you've done your best to protect yourself and others, you may still have been exposed. If you realize that someone else's blood has had contact with an open cut or wound on your body, or somehow got splashed in your eyes or mouth, you need to follow 3 steps. Treat the exposure, report the exposure, seek post-exposure treatment if needed. Just because you come in contact with blood doesn't mean you have been exposed to a bloodborne pathogen. Your skin is a very good protective barrier. Unlike chemicals, bloodborne pathogens are not absorbed through their skin. If you come in contact with blood, but your skin is intact, you have not been exposed, so don't have to report it. Simply wash the affected area with soap and water. However, if someone's blood comes into contact with a break in your skin, like a cut, a scrape, a bite mark, or even through a needle stick, or someone's blood splashes in your eyes, nose, or mouth, you have been potential bloodborne pathogen exposure, so you need to report it. If you have an exposure, the first priority is to clean the site where the exposure occurred. Wash the affected area with soap and water for 15 minutes. Be careful not to scrub the area, as vigorous scrubbing can further damage or abrade the skin. If the exposure to the mucous membrane, like your eyes, flush your area out with water for 15 minutes without soap. If you received a minor injury, no additional medical attention is required. Cover the injury with a bandage and notify your supervisor and EHS. If you experience a serious injury, seek medical attention from the closest medical facility and notify your supervisor and EHS. Some Mason recreation staff may have to collect things left behind by others. When gathering things, it's possible they may get an inadvertent needle stick from a used needle. Treatment for needle stick exposure is the same for the other exposures, but first, dispose of the needle in a sharps container. Never try to recap needles. Then, like other exposures, you wash the affected area with soap and water for 15 minutes, cover with a bandage, and report the stick to your supervisor and serum. It is likely that a discarded needle was used by someone, which means it has been contaminated with their blood. If the source individual has a bloodborne pathogen disease, it could potentially be transferred to you through the needle stick. If you have an accidental needle stick of unknown origin, you should follow up immediately with Student Health Services or an urgent care center and have blood drawn to establish baseline levels should you subsequently develop symptoms. To report an exposure, do the following. After you have treated the exposure, tell your supervisor. Let them know if things need to be cleaned up. Report the exposure through the EHS website. Medical costs for employees injured on the job may be covered by the state. Employees needing immediate care should go to the emergency room. However, for non-emergencies, employees seeking reimbursement for medical claims should choose medical treatment from the list of provided panel of physicians on the Human Resources website. As we talked about, it may take several weeks after an exposure for symptoms to develop. It may take 3 to 6 months to test positive for an exposure. By then, your recollection of details of the event may be sketchy. For that reason, after exposure, jot down specifics of the event, the date, the time, and the location, details of the incident, route of exposure, the source of blood, if known, any health issues at the time, etc. This is one of the reasons to file an incident report immediately after exposure to document details of the event. Yes, some people may exhibit no symptoms, but it can still carry the disease and infect someone else who comes into contact with their blood or other potential infectious material. Yes, actors Charlie Sheen and former basketball player Magic Johnson have HIV/AIDS but have no symptoms. Since they have the disease, they can infect others who come into contact with their blood or other potential infectious material. So what's wrong with this picture? Take a second. What's wrong with this picture is the person's not wearing gloves. So make sure you're always wearing gloves when providing first aid. Materials that don't have any significant amount of blood and don't put health keepers and sanitary workers at risk. A minor nosebleed is a judgment call on your part. If it's minor, dispose of it in regular trash. If you believe it to be a major nosebleed, dispose of it in a regulated medical waste bag. Would this be regulated medical waste? Is blood-soaked gauze regulated medical waste? Yes. If blood or other potential infectious materials can be squeezed out of the gauze, then it's considered regulated medical waste. If you're at home and you can throw a saturated gauze in your household trash, yes, regulated medical waste rules apply to the workplace, not households. Is this regulated medical waste? No. Band-Aids may be disposed in municipal trash. Per OSHA, regulated waste means liquid or semi-liquid blood or other potential infectious materials. Contaminated items that would release blood or other potentially infectious materials in a liquid or semi-liquid state is compressed. Items that are caked with dry blood or other potential infectious materials are capable of releasing these materials during handling. Contaminated sharps or pathological or microbiological waste containing blood or other potential infectious materials. How about needles and needle delivering devices? Regulated medical waste? Yes, these are. If you find a used needle on the ground, do not try and recapture it. To protect sanitation workers, needles should be disposed of in a hard plastic sharps container. Clorox wipes and Lysol wipes products kill many bacteria and viruses, but don't kill all bloodborne pathogens. The new Clorox Healthcare Germicidal wipes do meet the OSHA bloodborne pathogen standards and can be used to disinfect surfaces that are contaminated with blood and other potential infectious materials. Exposure discussion. A person has a bloody nose. Question 1. Is an individual at risk for contracting a bloodborne disease? No, a person treating their own bloody nose is not at risk at contracting a bloodborne disease. A person is not at risk from their own blood. Yes, if you go to help the person with a bloody nose and the person has a blood infection, you're at risk from contracting the disease. Bloodborne pathogens are not chemicals. They cannot enter your body by absorption through the skin. If the skin is intact without any cuts or scrapes, you're protected. However, if you have an open cut or scrape or blood does splash in your eyes or mouth, you're at risk. Since you are not known if any individual has a bloodborne disease, you need to take universal precautions and treat all blood as if it's infectious. If you run up to help the person, you should have your gloves on, and this would be an incident that you and the person both report. Bloodborne pathogen exposure from a mosquito or a tick. Even though the conservative agent can be found in the blood, diseases passed by insects are not considered bloodborne pathogens since they are not transmitted through person-to-person contact. An infected person cannot pass the disease to someone else through the blood-to-blood, even though blood-to-blood contact. The disease is actually passed by the insects, like mosquitoes and ticks. It's transmitted into the human's blood through the saliva of the mosquito or tick. Blood diseases transmitted this way are called vector-borne diseases. Even though there is the potential for a mosquito or tick to transmit a blood-borne pathogen, reporting every mosquito or tick bite that occurred would be ridiculous. However, if you develop Lyme disease or Zurich or other blood-borne diseases, you should let your supervisor know. Questions about blood-borne pathogens. Hazardous chemicals. Any chemical which cause physical or health hazards. OSHA defines hazardous chemicals as any chemical which can cause a physical or health hazard. In other words, has the potential to cause harm to humans, animals, or the environment. Different countries have different systems for classification and labeling chemicals. This proposes a challenge for companies who sell products internationally and have to comply with many different systems. It can also be confusing for workers who need to understand the hazards of a chemical in order to work with it safely. To standardize the classification process worldwide, the United Nations developed a global harmonized system, GHS. Compliance is voluntary, but most major industrialized countries have adopted it. The U.S. adopted the GHS in 2012. So all U.S. chemical manufacturers must now use GHS to label their products. GHS includes pictograms to identify hazards. The GHS system of classification divides chemicals into 3 categories: health, physical, or environmental, based on the primary hazards they pose. OSHA regulates health and physical exposures. The Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, regulates environmental exposures. A chemical that poses a physical hazard is one that can harm the body without necessarily touching it. For example, the chemical might cause a fire, explosion, or an uncontrolled reaction. Physical hazards fall into one of 3 categories. Fire hazards are chemicals that ignite or burn easily. Examples of everyday chemicals that pose fire hazards include cooking oil, nail polish remover, acetone, and alcohol-based hand sanitizers. In the workplace, chlorine is an oxidizer, which is a fire hazard. Oxidizers can react violently with other organic compounds, causing fire and explosions. Reactive hazards pose danger from uncontrolled chemical reactions. Alkaline metals like lithium, sodium, and potassium are reactive. They will release very toxic or corrosive gases when they come into contact with water. Reactive chemicals are responsible for numerous fires, explosions, or toxic gas releases. Explosion hazards are chemicals that cause a sudden or violent release of pressure, gas, and heat. Fire departments are often respond to explosions involving swimming pool chemicals. In California, rainwater leaked into a room where hundreds of drums of dry swimming pool chemicals were stored and caused an explosion. Most chemicals pose some type of health hazard. Generally, health hazards are either systemic, meaning they affect their entire body, or targeted, meaning they affect the specific organ or area of your body. There are 4 main classes of health hazards, namely harmful, corrosive, toxic, and irritant. Harmful hazards cause serious and prolonged health effects on short or long-term exposures. Corrosive hazards cause skin burns and permanent eye damage. Toxic hazards cause life-threatening effects even in small amounts or with short exposure. Irritants cause redness, rash, or less serious toxicity. You work at Mason may be put into contact with different chemicals. For example, wood stains or varnishes, like the edge, insecticides, cleaning disinfectant solutions, pool supplies, or other chemicals. Thousands of Allied troops were killed in World War I when the Germans fired chlorine gas across enemy lines. Yet people are exposed to chlorine routinely when using household chemicals or at the pool with no issues. Why? Well, for several reasons that are are interrelated, not irrelevant. Misspoke there. The effects of a chemical are dependent on the amount or dose. Generally, the greater the amount you are exposed to, the more likely the significant health effects will occur. Chlorine at a concentration of 1 to 3 ppm, as in a pool, has little effect. However, at a concentration of 1,000 parts per million will cause death. Also, people have different sensitivity to the same dose of a chemical. Take, for example, alcohol. One shot may give one person a massive headache, but not have any effect on someone else. Factors such as age, weight, diet, and medical conditions affect a person's sensitivity to a chemical. Young children are often more sensitive to chemicals since their bodies are still developing and they can't get rid of some chemicals as well as an adult. Toxicity is the degree to which a chemical can damage an organism. Toxicity is influenced by the dose and the duration and frequency of the exposure. Even large amounts of relatively harmless substance can be toxic. 2 aspirin tablets, for example, can help with a headache, but taking the entire bottle of aspirin will cause stomach pain, nausea, vomiting, and possibly death. Chlorine is highly toxic. Exposure to a low concentration of chlorines for long periods may have equally destructive effects as a short-term exposure to a high concentration. The physical state of the chemical, whether a gas, liquid, or solid, can influence how harmful it is. Different physical states affect areas of exposure. Think of water vapors versus ice. Ice would be a direct exposure, whereas vapors would be more systematic. However, how the chemical gets into your body also affects its potency. For example, if the chemical is a gas or a vapor and inhaled, it will cause systematic issues, whereas chemicals that come into contact with the skin may cause localized effect. Regardless of where it enters, once a chemical is in your circulation system, it can affect areas far from the entry point. There are 4 ways that chemicals generally enter the body. First one, you may ingest them. If you swallow a chemical, it will not generally harm the gastrointestinal tract unless it is an irritant or corrosive. If the chemical is insoluble in the fluids of your stomach, it is generally excreted. If it is soluble, it will be absorbed through the lining of your gastrointestinal tract into your bloodstream, which could damage internal organs. Second way. If the chemical is a vapor, gas, or mist, you may inhale it. After inhaling, you will exhale some of the chemical, but some of it will remain in your lungs. The direct contact may damage your lung tissue, or the chemical may diffuse through your lungs and into your bloodstream and cause systemic health issues. It is possible for a chemical to enter your body through an accidental needle stick, maybe from a used epi or insulin pen, or a chemical, or a chemical may be absorbed through the skin. As you learned in bloodborne pathogens, your skin is a good protective barrier against virus and bacteria. Bloodborne pathogens cannot be absorbed through the skin, but chemicals can. If a chemical gets on your skin, you may experience redness or a rash, or if highly corrosive, it may burn or destroy your skin tissue. Chemicals can penetrate your skin or be absorbed into the bloodstream. Once in the bloodstream, they can travel through your body and damage internal organs. The eyes are particularly sensitive to chemicals. Even short chemical exposures can damage your eyes or be absorbed through the eye membranes and transported into other parts of the body, causing harmful effects. How can you know if there has been a chemical exposure? It is always important when arriving at a scene to look around. You might see a splash or a spill or notice a hazard in the room. When chlorine gas was released in World War I, the gas appeared as a greenish cloud, so soldiers knew it was coming. You may smell a chemical release. Some chemicals have a distinct smell. Cyanide, for example, smells like almonds, so if you notice an almond smell when you enter a room, you should leave immediately. Not all chemicals give off an odor. A chemical exposure may cause physical symptoms like a headache, nausea, dizziness, or confusion. You might have difficulty breathing or notice a rash, a burn, or blistering on your skin. If you don't see, smell, or feel anything but suspect a chemical release, monitoring and testing equipment can be used to see if there is a chemical presence. When you're working in an area with chemicals, it is important to understand the dangers and risks they pose. There are 3 places to find information about a chemical. Safety data sheets are created by the chemical manufacturers and tells you everything you need to know about a chemical. Most companies post their SDS online. Manufacturer label on the chemical itself will have pertinent information. Workplace label should have the chemical name and significant dangers listed. The Safety Data Sheet, or SDS, is the most thorough source of information for chemicals. Regardless of the manufacturer or product type, all chemicals that originate in the countries using the GHS will have a safety data sheet that follows the GHS formats and provide information in these 16 areas. Green Clean is a disinfectant used by Mason Rec. Let's look at the SDS for Green Clean. What should you do if you get green clean in your eyes? So according to the SDS, hold your eye open and rinse slowly and gently. Rinse slowly and gently with water for 15 to 20 minutes. Remove contact lenses if present. After the first 5 minutes, then continue rinsing your eye. Call a poison control center or a doctor for treatment advice. What PPEs should you wear when using Green Clean? So it tells you right there on the label. Protective equipment. A respiratory protection, hand protection, eye protection, and a skin and body protection. Safety data sheets have the most complete information about a chemical. Protect yourself. Before you use a chemical, take a few minutes and review the SDS. It is important to focus on how to use the product. An accident at a Buffalo Wild Wings in Burlington, Massachusetts occurred when an employee used a cleaning product and the store manager used a different chemical to clean the floor. One cleaner had a bleach, strongly basic, and the other was acidic. The two chemicals reacted and caused deadly fumes. Also, wear the correct personal protective equipment, PPE. Not all PPE is equal. Look at the SDS to make sure you have the right types of gloves and whether you need to wear safety glasses when working with the chemical. Make sure you know where to find the PPE and that they're the right size for you. Where do you find the SDS? Of course, you can find the safety data sheets online, but OSHA requires employers to keep a safety data sheet for all hazardous chemicals used in a workplace, so employees have immediate access to an SDS in their work area, even if the power goes out and the internet connection is lost. At Mason, SDS for chemicals is in a work area are found at the Right to Know stations. These stations are in central locations so employees can find them quickly and easily. Make sure you know where the Right to Know stations are in your workplace. Fairfax Aquatic and Fitness Center, the pool room. Ask your supervisors where they are for the RAC, the SciTech Aquatic Fitness Center, and the SciTech Edge. You can also find chemical information on the manufacturer label. Manufacturer labels should include signal words and pictograms, hazard statements, and a precautionary statement. Workplace labels should also have the chemical name and dangers listed. In accordance to the OSHA Hazard Communication Standards, employer workplace labels must, at minimum, have the following: be written in English and other language if a worker using a chemical is non-English speaking, name of the product, words, pictures, symbols, and a combination thereof with general information of hazards of the chemical. If you come across something that is unlabeled, and you don't know what it is or if it's hazardous or a risk it can cause, don't use it. We can't stress that enough. If you don't know what it is, don't use it. Report it to your supervisor. Be sure to store chemicals in a safe, clean, properly vented area that is secure. Follow the storage guidance in the chemical SDS. Chemicals should be stored according to class. Acids with acids, bases with bases. Acids and bases can only be stored together if they're in a wall or divider between the two, or they are stored in a secondary containment on separate shelves. Don't store items on top of cabinets. Make sure to store chemicals in a proper container. No milk jugs or soda bottles. With a tight-fitting lid to prevent chemical vapors from escaping and to make sure the product is labeled properly. Gas cans should be metal, not plastic. The picture on the slide is the pool chemical storage for the Aquatic and Fitness Center on the RAC campus. Despite your best efforts to protect yourself, you have an inadvertent chemical exposure. What do? Follow the same procedures we reviewed for the bloodborne pathogen exposures. Treat the exposure. Make sure you know the location of your emergency shower and eye washes. Again, you should consult the first aid section on the SDS before working with chemical so you don't waste time trying to determine treatment after an exposure. Tell your supervisor and report the incident on the EHS website, which again is ehs.gmu.edu. Seek post-exposure treatment if necessary. This chart summarizes chemical spill response if you cause or discover a hazard chemical spill on campus. If it is a minor spill, you know the chemical and its hazards, and you have the proper cleanup materials and necessary PPE to clean the spill without placing anyone at risk, you can clean the spill yourself. Otherwise, call EHS. For major or emergency spills, evacuate and secure the area around the spill and call EHS. If you call 911, give your name and phone number, the location of the spill, and as many details as you can about the spill. Chemical name, estimated amount, and if the spill is contained or if it's still leaking. Also let them know if anyone is injured or been exposed. Don't hang up until the dispatcher tells you to. County Fire and Rescue will contact Mason Police and may need help navigating to the spill. So in summary, review the SDS prior to use or contact. Protect yourself by wearing the correct PPE. Know where your emergency equipment and information is prior to any chemical use. Only use chemicals from containers with a complete label and a corresponding SDS available at your Right to Know station. So take a minute, look at this picture, and tell me what is wrong with it. If you said not wearing gloves and the spray bottle is not labeled, you are correct. Can you wear nitrile gloves when using Green Clean, a corrosive disinfectant? Yes. The SDS says to wear chemical resistant gloves. Nitrile gloves are chemical resistant. So what's wrong with this picture? Take a minute and think about it. If you said the bucket of liquid has no label to identify the contents, and the bucket has no lid to protect from a spill or splash, you're correct. This picture happened to be an incident where Mason was cited. What do you do if a chemical splashes in your eyes? Follow the first aid procedures listed on the SDS. For chemical eye splashes, most instructions will say to remove contacts and flush the eye with clean water using eye wash or faucet for at least 10 to 15 minutes, then seek medical attention if needed. Where can you find the following? Mason's Hazard Communication Plan, Mason's Bloodborne Pathogen Exposure Plan, report an incident, injury, or unsafe conditions, register for various safety trainings, print a copy of your training record, find the contact information or other safety questions. You can find it on the Environmental Health and Safety Office website, which is ehs.gmu.edu. COVID safety training. August of 2021, there is a new COVID safety training that must be taken by September 3rd, 2021. This is different from the return to campus training everyone did a year ago. This is a new training different from previous training that everyone must complete. If you have any questions, please talk to your supervisor or contact EHS for further information. So after this important information to know, there'll be a quiz/poll. 80% is the minimum passing score. If you miss more than 2, we will notify you and send you a fulfillable quiz to retake. Please let the instructor know by chat or email if you can't see the poll on your screen. If you submit a poll or quiz too soon before the finish, in either case, you will email you a fillable quiz to complete and return. Proof of attendance, you can view or print your training history online where you register for this course. Please allow up to 1 business week for your record to be updated and include your credit for this course. Thank you for taking the time of doing the athletic and recreation safety training. Have a good day.